In this video, I will describe a philosophy which has been adapted from the professional Texas Hold'em poker community. The philosophy can be used to form a pre-game plan based on your opponent's player type, but it is more useful as a way to diagnose your mental errors when you do a VOD review after a match. The philosophy breaks players down into one of four types based on their approach to the game. There are two adjectives which govern which type you are, whether you are loose or tight, and passive or assertive. Even in the poker community, where it's much harder to exploit mistakes, virtually every good player is tight assertive, and that's where we want to be as well. So let's break down these two adjectives and look at some positive and negative examples of each. First off, what does it mean to be a tight player? A tight player's goal is to find low-risk, high-reward plays and to minimize their mistakes. It embodies the old adage, don't get hit. On the other hand, a loose player is willing to take higher risk plays with any amount of reward, because their goal is to maximize the number of times they hit their opponent. There are tons of examples of loose play, but let's just consider one. Here, Pikachu overextends on this tech chase and gets hit by Falcon's out-of-shield up smash, more concerned with hitting Falcon than the risk. On the other hand, a tighter player may see that they can't get this tech chase and instead control their space with a short hop up air, punishing Falcon when he up smashes instead. So now let's look at the second adjective, assertive versus passive. An assertive player is always trying to apply pressure to their opponent and force them into making mistakes that they can then capitalize on. On the other hand, the main goal of a passive player is to avoid feeling pressured themselves. And while they obviously welcome mistakes from their opponent, they're not always in position to capitalize on them. Again, there are tons of ways that a passive mindset can be manifest. But perhaps the most quintessential example is the dodge roll, where a player has no hope of punishing their opponent. Pivot dash grab, on the other hand, allows you to maintain pressure and capitalize on your opponent's mistakes. When they first pick up the game, virtually every player is either a loose passive or loose assertive player. They simply don't know enough game mechanics to properly calculate risk. But even after getting better, a lot of players will inadvertently maintain these loose mindsets. Other players will learn that mitigating their own risk can give them a huge advantage, and they become tight passive players. But these three philosophies have serious drawbacks. It's not until the loose assertive player decides to start balancing their risk, or the tight passive player intentionally puts pressure on their opponent, that their mindset changes into that of a tight assertive player. Beat a loose passive player by pushing them into a corner and baiting out unwise approaches. Passive players can often be pushed into the corner with very little effort, and from there they'll generally do one of two things: an obvious approach that you can predict and punish, or an unwise jump which puts them in a risky situation. Simply maintaining stage position, even if you're standing still, can put tons of pressure on your opponent. Loose players can also often be baited, especially with things like fading back aerials. Loose assertive players will bring the fight to you, so beat them with hitboxes and baits. Put yourself in juicy looking positions and rely on your anti-airs or strong aerial hitboxes. Something aggressive like a dash up smash is always only moments away when you're playing a loose assertive player. It's a good idea just to control the space around you and use your aerial drift to bait them into making those mistakes. Even relatively obvious baits like shield push-offs can be immensely powerful. A tight passive player will be more difficult to bait, but can still be put into disadvantageous situations. Tight passive players are very comfortable punishing overextensions from their opponent by dodging out of the way preemptively and then attacking where they used to be. However, you can combat this by taking stage control and then learning where they like to dodge. You can then attack where they're going to be instead of where they were. The longer the game goes on, the more information you can pick up on their dodge habits without exposing any of your approach habits in the process. Let's review some of those basic strategic principles. First off, it's always good to take and maintain stage control, but this is even better against passive players who won't fight you for it. Against loose players especially, inducing mistakes by baiting them and then capitalizing on them can get you a ton of free victories. And finally, a long game will always favor the tight assertive player because they will make fewer mistakes and put more pressure on their opponent the longer the game goes on. But notice that these are standard, fundamental principles no matter which kind of player you're playing against, which is why I have these player types in parentheses. No matter who you're against, taking stage control will give you an advantage, And if you can bait out a mistake, you don't really care if your opponent is classified as a loose or tight player. My point is that of all the reasons you lost, it's very unlikely that the top one is going to be that you misjudge your opponent's player type. This philosophy should be about you and changing your mindset, not about predicting your opponent. When I do a VOD review, I notice that the majority of my mistakes are either execution, by messing up something like a combo, or positional mistakes, when I put myself in a bad position for no reason. These execution and positional mistakes are the most impactful, and that's what we should spend the majority of our time trying to improve. Recall my earlier example of the tight player who doesn't overextend on his tech chase, but stop and rewind it. And if we go back to the initial grab with percentages, you'll see that a competent player would get a quicker initial dash and be able to tech chase without any risk at all. So if you're doing a review and you're getting hit with out of shield options, it might not mean you're loose, it might just mean you're slow. But sometimes you will come across a clip which would make a good player think,
I don't really understand what's going on in either player's mind right here.
And every now and then, the mistake you've made is having the wrong philosophy. Here are two such examples from my own games. In this first example, I'm playing Pikachu against Mojo Monkey's Falcon. And after landing this stray forward air, I decide to retreat and barely dodge his run grab with a pivot. And this is a great position for me, but instead of capitalizing on my nice pivot with a grab, I play passively and pivot away again, getting hit by his aggressive dash grab and subsequent combo. If you watch this clip again, I think you'll see that there's pretty much no strategic benefit to the second pivot that I attempt. It's instead indicative of the passive mindset that I had in that moment. I was more interested in not feeling pressured by him than in trying to capitalize on a mistake that he might make. In this next clip, you can see more of my overly passive Pikachu, this time against Danky Kang's Kirby. And what at first glance looks to be an overextension with that back air is actually, I believe, the result of my passive mindset. It's clear that this dash attack is never hitting me, but instead of grabbing or short hop down airing, I jump as far away as possible and then get flustered by my passive play and come back in with an ill-advised back air. It should be your goal to adopt the mindset of a tight, assertive player. In this philosophy, you seek out low-risk, high-reward plays and minimize your own mistakes, while you try to apply pressure to your opponent to capitalize on theirs. Taking and maintaining stage control will put your opponent in a disadvantageous situation and put implicit pressure on them. You should always be looking to bait your opponent and capitalize on their mistakes. And oftentimes, if you have stage control, this will happen for free. And remember that a long game will favor the tight, assertive player. So if you feel uncomfortable prolonging a game, you should ask yourself why. Finally, remember that most of the mistakes we make are based on a failure to execute the fundamental principles of the game. Blaming your poor mindset is no substitute for practice.